Hello and welcome to the Rescue Task Force Evacuation presentation. This is brought to you by the Dayton MMRS Mumbai Committee and the Wright State University Division of Tactical Emergency Medicine. My name is Alex Keller. I'm one of the emergency physicians with the Wright State University Division of Tactical Emergency Medicine. Please remember this briefing is confidential for official use only. It is not subject to mandatory release or disclosure to the press or public and is considered a security record under Ohio Revised Code 149.433. First thing we're going to talk about is some definitions that we'll be using in other PowerPoints along the way. The first thing to know is casualty collection points. These can be set up per command, whether it is either the incident command or the unified command, depending on which service you're coming from, and it can consist of up to 3 echelons. Warm zone casualty collection point may also be referred to as a tactical CCP, and this is used when multiple victims may be present that cannot be evacuated immediately from the zone, and so the RTF using this casualty collection point may do so perhaps, say, inside a school during an active shooter incident. This may be located inside a classroom where casualties were already located or within the area where the RTF is operating. An extraction CCP would likely be located near the entry or exit point to the building or the space, and this may be where you would move patients from your initial tactical CCP to stage them prior to evacuation into the treatment area. This brings us to our last one, which is the cold zone CCP. This is often referred to as the treatment area, so this will be located in an area that's expected to be protected, or at least not to come under any sort of hostile activity or fire. This would closely align with what we would standardly think of as a mass casualty treatment area, and should be relatively co-located with the transport area so that the transportation officer can easily decide what they have, where they need to go, and then get them to the transport vehicle. So a couple of definitions to be aware of, and we talked about this in other PowerPoints as well. The hot zone is the area with a direct and immediate threat. If you are taking bullets in your direction, you are in the hot zone. By comparison, the warm zone is an area where the potential for a hostile threat exists. An example of this would be if somebody is shooting out the back side of a house and you're standing on the street side. The back of the house is the hot zone, front of the street side is the warm zone, but that perpetrator could certainly come to the front of the house in a matter of seconds and start shooting out the front window, and now you find yourself in a hot zone. So these are absolutely places that are fluid in nature, and you need to keep that in mind when you're deciding what is a hot, a warm, or a cold zone. So remote assessment methodology is a technique that we use in tactical medicine that may not be commonplace in all traditional EMS. We want to maximize the benefit to the patient while minimizing provider risk. The first step means we want to make this assessment from a relatively safe location behind either concealment, which provides prevention of detection of your presence, or cover, which actually would provide you with a physical barrier from incoming rounds or explosions, etc. This remote assessment methodology also aids the rescue task force in coming up with a decision for how to effect their rescue plan. So casualties who can move themselves to cover should be told to do so. If you can call out and tell the patient that they should crawl to the sound of your voice and they're able to do so, perfect. If you look out and notice that there's a clear wound to the head with exposed brain matter, then obviously you know that you've got a body recovery situation, or at best case, an expectant patient for which you do not need to expose the rescuers to potential fire. These casualties who are responsive but cannot move present a challenge in themselves, as they may require rescue, but we need to develop a more complete picture before crossing that open zone or exposing ourselves to that danger. Questions to ask yourself while using this method: is the area secure? Do we know if the casualty is a victim or potentially a perpetrator? Is the casualty stable? And that may be the most difficult piece since we're so used to making that assessment hands-on and we're not able to do that from the remote station? Or can the casualty move or provide self-care? Remember that casualty that is responsive but perhaps unable to move due to a gunshot wound to the leg, we may be able to throw them a tourniquet or direct them how to apply direct pressure, or even perhaps use a belt as a makeshift tourniquet until we're able to get to that casualty. When planning your rescue, there are several considerations to take into account. Number one, what's the risk to the rescuers? You don't want to move into a zeroed-in position where somebody's taking effective fire. At that point, you should immediately recognize you're now in a hot zone and there's different action to be taken, such as evacuate and shelter in place. But otherwise, you should determine where's the fire coming from. Did the casualty somehow set off a booby trap or a mine? Or are there more common hazards such as electrical or fire, chemical hazards that we're used to dealing with that are going to have to be taken into consideration when planning the rescue? And you also need to know what assets you have. Do you have covering fire from your law enforcement personnel? Is there a smoke screen available or other items that you can move behind that will provide some concealment? And what rescue equipment do you have? Do you have a throw rope? Do you have a litter? Do you have drag straps? And things such as that. Additional considerations, you want to make sure that everybody knows their role in the rescue. And when able, you want to make sure and alert the victim to the plan. That way they can help you in any way that you need, that they're able. But at the same time, you don't want them to hinder you by not understanding the plan and inadvertently working against your attempts to rescue them. If they're able to walk or they're conscious and able to hold on to you, as we'll see in a few minutes with some of the drags, you want to allow that victim to assist as much as possible in his own rescue. You also want to consider deferring emergency management of airways while moving. It's darn near impossible to try to bag somebody while carrying a stretcher with 4 people and keeping the patient calm all at the same time. So if you can quickly move the patient without having to definitively manage any airway, you want to defer that airway management until later. Dragging is one option for evacuating a casualty from the environment. Compared to litters and other rescue devices, dragging is probably the fastest method, and you want to drag the patient along the long axis of the body. This can be done with 1 or preferably 2 rescuers, with the realization that when doing it with 1 rescuer, it's very tiring, it's typically slower, and it's a much less controlled movement of the patient. The rescuers may be doing this in a standing or a crawling position, and we'll look at some of these in later slides. So the first example here would be the closed drag. Here you can see the rescuer is grabbing the casualty by the packs, straps there, or even just the collar of his uniform. If the casualty was conscious but just had been shot in the leg, notice this patient may actually be able to return fire if he has the use of his arms. This is pretty quick over grass or a wet surface. It's not so easy over gravel or concrete that creates more friction. You want to hold the casualty under the arms if that's all that you've got. If you can use the casualty's clothing, web gear, tactical vest, as we've already talked about. If you have something like a poncho liner or the quick litter that's included in the RTF gear, this may give you something that creates a little more slide between the surface and the patient, making them a little easier to move with less friction. The biggest disadvantage is the casualty is in contact with the ground, so anything that you're having to step over, they're having to slide over, obviously you can, over glass or gravel, etc., injure the patient additionally. Several different carries that can be used include the firefighter's carry, the hawse carry, the 2-person carry, fore and aft, and the SEAL Team 3 carry, which we'll look at here coming up. Firefighter carry, over the shoulders as seen in the picture here. It's useful for people who have gear on. The biggest problem is for a smaller rescuer, you may have more difficulty with a larger victim, and it requires you to support the full body weight plus any gear that the patient is wearing. Pretty quick over a very short distance, but you will tire quickly. The hawse carry involves getting the patient's arms over your shoulders so that instead of lifting from their armpits, you're now supporting their body weight over the top of your shoulders. Again, this is a pretty quick method to move people. It can be used over a short to medium distance, probably up to about 100, 150 yards. But again, disparities in rescuer body size may make this more or less effective for any particular person. The two-person seat carry is useful when you have perhaps a larger person. You've got a longer distance to travel, because by using two people to support the weight, they're not going to tire as quickly. This does not work well for an unconscious patient. This needs to be a patient that is capable of holding your shoulders with their arms and supporting their upper body. Basically, the rescuers will reach across and grab their arms to make a large circle or square. The patient will then sit back into that space, or if they were on the ground, you could simply reach behind the knees and grasp wrists and behind the back. Again, this does require a conscious patient, and I recommend holding each other's wrists as opposed to hands, because once you become a little bit sweaty, it's easy to lose grip. The next carry is the two-person fore and aft carry, just like it sounds, one in the front, one in the back. The important thing is that both people face the same direction. The person on the foot end, as seen to the right of this picture, you want to be standing between the legs. You're going to grip underneath the legs to support the lower body. And the rescuer on the head end, this is not a perfect picture, because notice how he is sort of grabbing just the clothes. That's going to be very difficult to maintain with a larger patient or a heavier patient over any kind of distance. To improve this, the sergeant in the BDUs on the patient's head end should be reaching all the way around his chest and grabbing his own wrist. The other thing that'll do is bring the patient higher up on his body, meaning that his legs will have more room to move. This can also be done with an unconscious patient compared to the previous two-person carry. The SEAL Team 3 carry is a hybrid between the Hawes carry that we saw earlier and the two-person side-by-side carry. The benefit here is this can be done with either a conscious or an unconscious patient. All you need to do is get the arms up around the shoulder of each rescuer and then reach behind and grab either the belt or the web gear to support the hips. If the patient's conscious, obviously they can hold onto your neck themselves, which would allow you to have another arm to use for some other purpose. And if the patient's unconscious, simply reach up and grab their wrist, securing their arm around your neck and shoulder. Litters are another option. You can use conventional prefabricated styles, one of which is included in the Rescue Task Force treatment bag and gear set, or you can use an improvised litter such as a poncho, a gym doormat that you turn upside down so that it will slide easily across the floor, or anything else that you can think of at the spur of the moment. The Sked and the Stokes litter or Stokes basket are some prefabricated, commonly used platforms. They work well over rough terrain. They are rigid enough that they can be used in building interiors, raising and lowering over significant distances. They have the strap and security capabilities and the load-bearing capabilities to do so. Their size can make them somewhat prohibitive depending on your circumstance, and due to the logistics of both having, maintaining, and getting them to the scene can make it a little more difficult in the tactical environment. The Sked litter, as you see here, is the orange litter. It's got integral patient securing straps. It is a hoistable litter. It can be used for helicopters, rope rescues, cliff rescues, etc. A benefit to it as well is it is a very hard plastic material that will slide very nicely across most surfaces in schools, office buildings, etc. It does require a little bit of familiarity to use quickly, and so if this is something that you're going to have in your armamentarium, you need to make sure and train with it so that when using it in real life, you don't find the active shooter scenario to be the first time you're using this equipment. Here's a picture of the Stokes basket being used on a hoist. Again, this is a more rigid structure even than the sked. The sked can be rolled up, whereas the Stokes basket cannot. Both are hoist capable. Just another picture here of the Stokes basket being used in a hoist. Again, if this is something you're going to be using, and especially if you for some reason foresee yourself in a hoist scenario, you need to have qualified operators to employ this equipment. The Blackhawk Rapid Flex Medical Litter we'll talk about for just a couple moments. It's included in the RTF gear set as seen here. It can be used to drag or carry a patient. The drag and carry weight is rated at just about 1,600 pounds. The Dayton MMRS modified our litters to leave the 4 carry handles, 1 on each corner, and then 1 at the end of the long axis. And the center chest strap was removed to make it more packable in the carry bag. Remember, if you're using this over rough surfaces or rough terrains in a drag capacity, that you may start to break down that heavy-duty vinyl, so do so with caution. It works exceptionally well on slick or grassy surfaces to drag a patient. And then improvised litters. Be creative. Poncho liners, a blanket, an extra jacket. If you have one of those huge doormats in a gymnasium that is rubberized on the bottom so it won't slip, if you flip it over to the carpet side, that will slide wonderfully across the gym floor, and the rubber side, which is now on the patient side, will help keep the patient from sliding off. And then with any litter or any drag, remember, when you're moving over a distance, always recheck your tourniquets anytime you need to sit down and rest and you have time to do so. Also recheck your splints and dressings and make sure that they haven't been dislodged during movement. Next, we're going to talk about a couple armored personnel carrier options that are available within the Dayton MMRS region. This is a picture of Nashville SWAT Team's Bearcat. It is the slightly smaller version made by the same company that makes the Bear armored vehicle. It's 4x4 capable and will stop up to 50 caliber rounds, and it provides a method for both infill and exfil of tactical personnel as well as patients. So armored vehicles or patrol cars can give you a wonderful asset, not only in terms of putting people inside of them and moving them around, but you can also use them as mobile cover. You can place them between the threat and the casualty. You can use it as rolling cover if you need to do a drag over an open field or an open space. If you can get that bear to the area but are unable for whatever reason to get the patient inside, you could keep it between the threat and have it slowly move and keep your rescue personnel, the patient, or the tactical team on the safe side of the vehicle. Really, your inventiveness and ingenuity in your team training is the only limitation. In order to get the casualty to the vehicle, you're going to have to figure out exactly what the scenario is. It's always going to be fluid. Do you need somebody to provide a shield, some smoke screen? Can you move the vehicle to you first? You're just going to have to look at the tactical scenario and decide what the best route is. The casualty is ambulatory. Can they simply get themselves to the vehicle, or with assistance, can we get them to a safer location? SCAB-E is the medical treatment mnemonic that we're using for the rescue task force. I like this one because it changes your mindset from the ABCs that we've been beat into us forever in traditional EMS. In the tactical environment, we must have situational awareness. You got to know what's going on, because it doesn't matter if you're the best intubation expert in the world. If you step out into an open area without looking first for somebody with an open head wound, planning for that perfect tube, and you get shot, you've just lost the battle. So situational awareness is always paramount. C, circulation. This includes massive hemorrhage, so we're thinking tourniquet first. Make sure that you're stopping the bleeding, keep the red blood cells inside. Next, airway. Can't breathe if we don't have an airway. Breathing. Simple things. Open the airway. decompress the tension in the thorax, evaluate and appropriately treat an open chest wound if needed. And then in big and bold here, evaluate and evacuate. So truly you could just about cut this down to S and E if you had to. You need the situational awareness to know how much treatment to do in the tactical setting, and once you've evaluated that patient, you want to get them evacuated as soon as feasibly possible. The longer you stay in a high threat environment, the more likely that something is going to go wrong. So situational awareness, circulation, airway, breathing, evaluate and evacuation. So since we're in the casualty evacuation lecture, let's spend just a few moments here talking about the evaluation and evacuation section. So what do we want done here? You always want to evaluate the effectiveness of your interventions as you're initiating the evacuation chain. So recheck your tourniquets, pressure dressings, reassess and make sure you didn't miss any bleeding that you can stop. Reassess the respiratory status. Remember, penetrating wound to the chest as an open pneumothorax could turn into a tension pneumothorax later once you put a chest seal on. So the patient that initially looked good may later require a needle decompression. So always reassess that respiratory distress. If you haven't already done so, this is a great time to roll that patient. Make sure you get a good look at the back. Conscious patient's position of comfort, unconscious patient's in recovery position, all stuff we're familiar with there. So in the rescue task force paradigm, we learned at Columbine that waiting for the scene to be perfectly safe results in increased morbidity and mortality. So if you still have a warm zone to operate in, and you still have unknown areas as far as casualties, and you still have the adequate supplies to be able to treat casualties, you should continue your movement as long as it is safe to do so. If you find you're out of supplies or you've got all the patient treated and it's time to go, initiate your evacuation chain and move those patients to a CCP. So if you're already moved all into a room, it's time to make that decision. Are we all going to a standard door exit? Are we all going out a window? How are we getting out of the building? Make sure you're communicating with your assets outside the building, your casualty collection points, your triage officers, your transport officers. Let them know when you're coming and going, how many patients you're bringing with them. Make sure you think about your security as you're moving. Certainly we all don't want to stand up and run through the middle of the gym. If we can go down the hallway and around the gym and keep from being seen that way. And then obviously public safety personnel move up in the evacuation priority simply because they're here to help, and the patient evacuation phase also requires probably the most communication with the remaining teams outside the building. You're going to have to communicate with the command structure, let them know the team status, how many patients you have, so that the rest of the support elements can start to arrange that transport, staging of additional assets, and making sure that they have enough to meet your requirement for the number of patients that you have. Once you run out of supplies or you are out of patients, you have got to get these people moving. So you need to evacuate what you have. And remember, you likely will not be the only rescue task force on scene. In a true mass casualty, we would hope that we would have several RTF personnel responding so that multiple teams could be established. Once you have those additional RTFs, you need to task them appropriately. So if one RTF has already entered the building and encountered the first group of casualties, when the next RTF is available and makes entry, they could either be tasked with evacuation of the patients that have already been stabilized, or they could leapfrog past that initial RTF and continue the search and initial medical treatment of additional casualties. Just to reiterate what we talked about at the introduction to this presentation, consider where your CCPs are needed. That warm zone casualty collected point is needed within the edge of the building or in the tactical portion of the environment. That extraction CCP wants to be set up near a secure exit point so that the rescue task force can bring those patients to an exterior door perhaps, and then they can be moved to the cold zone for further treatment and evacuation off-site. And then, when possible, the warm zone and extraction casualty collection point should be staffed by the RTF equipped and trained EMS personnel. Because these EMS personnel are in the potentially danger zone, we want them to have the benefit of that ballistic protection and the training to properly use it, as opposed to exposing our unarmored traditional EMS colleagues to that environment. As we've talked about on multiple times throughout this presentation, the warm zone can become a hot zone in the blink of an eye. If you find yourself under fire or direct threat, you should evacuate immediately, or at least shelter in place if unable to evacuate the location. If you get a directive from the law enforcement element of the rescue task force, the command structure, whether it be Incident Commander Unified, to evacuate, this needs to be done immediately. This may be a partial, i.e. 1 or 2 team evacuation, and it may be a complete clearing of the building. This could be due to a myriad of reasons, but needless to say, we can always go back in, but if we are there and something bad happens, we may not be able to get out. And then lastly, remember, an injury to any rescue task force member equals an immediate evacuation. This entire concept is based around the team mentality. We are going in as medics to save lives under the watchful supervision of law enforcement officers who are there to protect our lives, and an injury to any part of that results in a breakdown of that team. So if any RTF member is injured, that needs to be evacuated immediately, and again, we can always come back. So in conclusion, situational awareness is paramount. You've got to always have your head on a swivel, keep an eye on all your surroundings, and know what is going on. You may be the person that notes the secondary IED. You may be the person that notes the casualty that's hidden in the corner. But if you're not looking, you're not going to find it. When it comes to evacuation, your options are limited only by your imagination. We covered several carries: 2-person, 1-person, hog, SEAL Team 6 carry, vehicle covers, a lot of different stuff, drags and litters, only limited by your imagination, so keep your mind open. Reassess your interventions at every opportunity. Every time you move a patient and you have to stop or you get a chance, reassess those tourniquets, those dressings, those splints. Things get moved and bumped and dislodged during these scenarios. Stay together. Your team is your lifeline in these settings. Your law enforcement guys absolutely going to take care of you, but you're also there as an extra set of eyes and ears with them while you're moving. So stay together, look out for each other. Risk ratio, just like in EMS and the fire service and law enforcement, we risk a lot to save a lot. We risk a little to save a little. So use your remote assessment methodologies. Consider your cover and concealment. How many people do I need to move to do it most safely versus most expediently, and always keep that ratio in mind. And again, you've got great training, you've got great teams, so as I like to say, go out there and stay relatively safe. The world is not a safe place, but we're going to try to keep it that way. Thank you for your time.